it's a fact around these parts that KG has been a little critical of your Texas
Now, hold on
Christian.
now. We're not going to start this.
Hold on.
We're not going to start this.
Hold on. Before he gets started, I just want to, I didn't hear all of the offensive comments. But I would just say, Kev, is that never say you're too good looking to get your girl took. You ain't seen her work out in TCU yet. You know what I'm saying? You don't know.
The only reason
you don't know what the compass is.
Touche, number one.
Oh, no, that was the time to double down, KG.
But I was going to say, number two, I have not had the experience of having mine stolen, so I can say from personal experience that I've done okay in that department. So I appreciate.
I'm happy for you. I'm happy for you, brother. But life is long. But I'm just saying.
Yes.
I'm happy for it.
Hence, I got married, so that wouldn't happen to me.
There you go. Fantastic. Joel, you obviously play for this TCU team. This TCU team this year, what would you say to somebody that would point to the idea or would claim that this team is just gets away with it has gotten it away with it all season? Like, what would you say to that claim?
I mean, I think there's some validity to that claim, but I don't think that has to be a negative thing. If anything, that could be a positive thing, because when you look at, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that TCU has the talent of Georgia or Ohio State. What I would say, though, is that they've got a lot of good talent, and they have a knack for winning close games. And to me, that is an accomplishment in and of itself. You don't have great talent. You're not going to be able to overwhelm these teams, but you've been able to pull out games against one of the toughest schedules in the country. I think I looked at one of the more recent strength of schedule rankings, and TCU was in the top 15. So it's not like, yes, they've gotten away with it, but that's fine. At the end of the day, the goal is to win. They've beaten a lot of good teams over and over again with last-second antics or the thing at Baylor or whatever, and I think that's a good thing. And if anything, that should drive more interest in them and make people want to see them more and not be some sort of, demerit against their record. If anything, they should be celebrated for finishing a regular season 12-0 with that many close calls on it.
It's funny because as you started to describe that, the one national championship team that came to mind that was the definition of the get away with it all-stars, that 2002 Ohio State Buckeyes team with Craig Krenzel as their starting quarterback. You want to talk about a team that got away with, I think they got away with it against Purdue in the regular season finale, if I remember correctly. That's how, and they got away with it all the way to a national championship, against, I believe it was Miami back in that 02 year. So there is precedent for some getaway all-stars to be able to win a national championship. I guess there is.
Oh, of course. And here's the thing, man. Look, we can think whatever we want to think about Georgia or Michigan, but Michigan barely beat Illinois. And I don't think anybody's going to sit up here and lie and say that Illinois is a really good team. And Georgia had its fights with Mizzou and Kent State. So we're not, none of the teams in the top four we're talking about are 2002 Miami or, a 2013 Florida State or 2005 Texas, whatever. We're talking about a year where there are really good teams, not much separation among the top. And so there would be some space for the, getting away with it all-stars. I'm choosing not to take that as the line in my office. You know what I'm saying? I'm going to roll with it, but I don't think it has to be a bad thing. I think that they're just as good as any of these other teams, and I think people will be surprised if they get a chance to line up. Look, if I gave you – people are giving Alabama a lot of credit for whatever reason. They don't have a good win on their record. They went down to Texas, really should not have won. They were gifted a couple of points on something that should have been a safety. They played a terrible game, but they escaped. But TCU went down to Austin, dominated them boys, and nobody's – nobody would be like, well, if people are giving Alabama a lot more credit for that victory than TCU got for it. And I just don't kind of understand why. I understand why. It's because of the branding and the helmet and all that stuff. Nobody believes that Alabama is as good as TCU, but that's not how we're supposed to do these things. It's not supposed to be about your belief.
So one of the things about this team that I find interesting is that it is largely the team that we saw kind of struggle under the last years of Gary Patterson. Yeah. And I know that you've had your, some concerns, let's say that, about Sonny Dykes. Where do you see this program over the next couple of years under Sonny Dykes' leadership, considering the turnaround he's been able to do with this team?
All right, let me just back up for a second, because obviously, you make the comment about Sonny Dykes, and that's right. I was skeptical. My thought always from this is
I didn't want to put you out there like that, Joel.
No, I appreciate you doing it because it gives me a chance to set it up. So what I'm saying is that, like, I was there when Coach Patterson came in as a defensive coordinator. And my thought has always been that if you're going to have that ugly of a divorce, if you're going to get rid of the guy that made your program nationally relevant, you saved TCU from the Chitlin circuit of college football. You've got his statue right out there on the stadium. If I'm going to get rid of Gary Patterson, I just kind of felt like it should be somebody that we should all be more excited about than Sonny Dykes. No offense to Sonny Dykes, but Sonny Dykes had shared a conference title, one conference title in his entire career as a head coach. And I'm looking at that, and I'm like, well, we couldn't do better than that. Like, that's the guy we're getting rid of Coach Patterson for. But as it turns out, you know what? Coach Patterson had built a nice reserve of talent there. If you can look at this team, there's a lot of speed. There's a couple of NFL guys on that team. The thing that had been missing, and that I guess I had overlooked all this time, is that TCU didn't look very well coached the last few years. They made a lot of stupid penalties. They never seemed to get a break in a game, and they never made their own breaks. And then the other piece of it is that if there was just one thing that TCU needed to put it all together in the last few years, like even if I just say, okay, they're going to make these stupid penalties or whatever, the quarterback, Max Duggan, had never lived up to whatever they thought that he was going to be. But if you bring in a guy like Sonny Dykes, who has NFL quarterbacks in his past, like Jared Goff or whoever else, like, that's pretty good. So that 1 year, there's been a lot of improvement with Max Duggan, and to me, that's been one of the biggest pieces of why the team has turned around from the last few years. The talent is mostly the same, but I think that it's, unfortunately for Coach Patterson, I think the program's run a little bit better right now.
Joel Anderson of Slate joining us right here on the Get Right with Reggie KG on 105.3 The Fan. Finally, when it comes to this TCU thing, before we switch subjects here, what ultimately do you think has to happen against K-State on Saturday to secure that college football playoff spot going for them?
Well, I mean, they shouldn't have to do nothing.
All right, not too much now. Not too much now, Joel.
Look. There is precedent for a team losing 35-7 to K-State in a Big 12 conference championship and still making it to a championship game. So it can happen. You can play a bad game against Kansas State and still advance. And my thing is, TCU won. They won the Big 12. They beat everybody in the league. And if they lose, they would lose in a game that nobody else would have to play. Anybody that would replace them in the top four, they would not have had to play a 13th week. So I guess I'm arguing on behalf of TCU not getting dropped if they happen to lose on Saturday. But I'm smarter than that. I understand it's not Alabama. I know it ain't Tennessee. So they need to go out there and take care of business. Were they to lose, I absolutely think they probably would get dropped out of the top four. It wouldn't, the committee could look stupid for a day, and then people would get over it because they're like, well, we don't want to see TCU no way. I'd rather see Alabama, 2-loss Alabama that barely beat Ole Miss. It's not a good team. People would rather see that. So, yeah, I mean, my advice to my boys, my alma mater, they just better take care of business because if they leave it in the hands of the committee, it could go wrong.
Joel Anderson of Slate right now on 105.3 The Fan. And Joel, on your podcast, Hang Up and Listen, you guys had a fantastic conversation about the Washington Post article written up, basically a feature in some ways by Sally Jenkins, and you have to help me with the other name, Kevin. I always forget.
Dave Meredith.
Thank you so
David
much, Joel.
Meredith.
I appreciate it because I didn't want to leave him out. He did fantastic work as well. They profiled Jerry Jones, and it was a fascinating look. And obviously, the thing that kind of caught social media and the conversations was the picture of Jerry at the steps of North Little Rock High. First of all, did you find anything interesting or novel about that picture in the ways that people talked about?
I mean, obviously there are a lot of things to take from it, and there are people that are in that picture that are suffering, that are going through a traumatic circumstance. If we can acknowledge that, then we can also acknowledge how crazy and ridiculous it is. It's just like it's almost like Jerry Jones was Larry David. He just got it just reminded me of Curry through how do you end up in like one of the more iconic photos of school desegregation efforts in the country? You just happen to be in the background of it, you know? So, I mean, that's the thing about it to me. I believe Jerry Jones when he says, I was just being curious, cutting class. That makes sense to me. So, I mean, if anything, what I see when I saw that photo was like something funny. Like, I was like, I'm sorry it had to be you, bro. You know what I'm saying? That was you. You were there. But I mean, that's just funny. I don't know. I mean, it could have been anybody else. If he had been there 45 seconds later, he's not immortalized in history like that. But those are the breaks.
So what are we missing when it comes to the discussion around this photo? Because I feel like the way that this was talked about, I felt like it told on a lot of people that, number one, they didn't read the article. But number two, in the way that the article, I think, was trying to get across certain ideas about the NFL and Jerry Jones relative to what his history may or may not have been. How did you view how this has all been played out with him?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, a lot of people were going around saying that Jerry Jones had been out there protesting against the Little Rock Nine, and that's not it. That was this is North Little Rock desegregation that happened in the same year, but it didn't take until years later, until the court started enforcing it. But what I took from it is that Jerry Jones is a complicated person, but like a lot of people in his position, older, wealthy, white, from the South, from a particular time, that he has the luxury to not really care about a lot of the institutional hurdles against the people that make his sport great. And that makes him very much within the mainstream. And I think that was what was so interesting about the piece that Washington Post did, Dave Marinis and Sally Jenkins, that they used him as an argument. He's the avatar for the mainstream NFL owner, although he stands out above them, but he's still older, white, family money, all that other sort of stuff. And they're using him to say, this is sort of the face of the resistance right here. But the one thing I give Jerry Jones credit for, which is why I say it's complicated, he talked about it. He's the only owner that was willing to talk about it and go on the record. And the other piece of it is that the black people that worked for him, from Maurice Carson to who used to be his offensive coordinator, to Will McClay, who was his VP of player personnel, they talked on the record and they were fairly open. It's not like they were complimentary of him. They said, "Hey, the guy's got blind spots." You can work with a person like that, I feel. Yeah, it doesn't mean that I agree with Jerry Jones. It doesn't mean that I'm not disappointed that he hasn't done more. But what I took from that was that he's at least been willing to engage in the conversation. And the bar is so low for people like Jerry Jones that's supposed to be a mark in his favor.
So, Joel, one of the things that I found interesting, because this Washington Post piece was written within the context of a full examination of hiring practices in the NFL and why there are so few black executives and coaches in this space. And one of the things that obviously is trying to been getting across, and they actually talked directly to Jerry about this, is the idea that if he was the one to lead on this in the ways that he leads in all sorts of other things, that other owners would follow suit. And I'm really interested in that concept. Do you agree with that? Because I'm not sure, considering the way that a lot of these owners want to make these decisions individually, and I don't know that they're all following suit and kowtowing to Jerry Jones.
I think that's right, and I've had a little bit more time to think about that. I think you're right. I think, Jerry Jones signed Michael Sam, who was the first, NFL draft prospect to come out as gay and got drafted in the 7th round, cut by the Rams. The Cowboys signed him. It ain't like Michael Sam found many other opportunities in the NFL after that. Jerry Jones, as they outlined in that story, kneeled with his players in 2017 during the height of the controversy over that. And it ain't like, we saw any other NFL owners out there bending the knee or anything. But I do think that symbolically it would be important. It would be meaningful if the guy for the most valuable, most popular franchise, I hate to say that as a Houstonian, but it's true. It would be meaningful if he did take that sort of stand. We don't know who it could influence or whose mind might be changed about something like that. But I think more cynically, and I'm given to cynicism as a man of a certain age from the South, I think a lot of those other rich guys are just like, well, that's fine for Jerry. That ain't got nothing to do with me. I'm a rich man too. I made a lot of money. Jerry Jones is not my boss. And I think that probably is more likely what would happen. Just if Jerry Jones decided he wanted to hire Maurice Carson today to make amends for it, it ain't like a whole bunch of other people going to be like, well, you know what? I should bring in Raheem Morris. Maybe I don't think it would go down like that.
But that is one of the things that I did find interesting about this, because Jerry Jones notoriously is a dude who like gambles on himself, and he even had kind of a little bit of tone deaf anecdote about a time where he was trying to get in good with a prospective client and just called up his old football coach to go golf at Augusta National to impress them. But
oh yeah,
I find this interesting, as Jerry Jones is a dude who's talked about drilling in land and just finding oil and like having that level of like gamble to him, not seeing the value in like just untapped potential, untapped markets in this way, or in this case, talking about like black head coaches and executives.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because you acknowledge that, right? That this is a guy that's made a lot of money, but he made money in one of the oldest, dirtiest, professions and fields that is going today, oil and gas. We're not talking about a guy that's like a tech billionaire or is like on the cusp, which doesn't mean that he's not a brilliant marketer or whatever. Like, he obviously had a knack for all that stuff too, and like showmanship. But I'm not surprised that he hasn't seen that. I mean, the guy sitting there in the interview in that story was like, I hire people I know. I'm cool with that. Like, that's the way I do it. That's the way business is done. That's why the Rooney Rule is mostly insufficient, because I'm only going to hire people I know. Well, that does not sound like a guy who is aware of missing out on the potential of other undervalued assets, so to speak, which is the black coach. Because black coaches, I mean, a lot of people may not believe this, because a lot of people don't believe that black people are good at things besides running and jumping. But black head coaches, as a whole, as a collective, have a higher winning percentage than their white counterparts, right? And we can just say, I mean, a lot of them get bad situations, they get bad teams, they get fired sooner, and yet and still they thrive. And so, yeah, it would be great if Jerry Jones said, you know what, maybe I should dig into that and see, maybe I could, take some advantages the other teams in the league won't. But that doesn't sound to be like, this is a guy, again, that was excited, telling all these other black candidates, hey, man, I called my Frank Broyles up to close a deal for me. You all could do that too. Well, obviously he's got some blind spots,
And just real quick before we let you go, do you find anything illustrative about like Jerry Jones' perspective when it comes to the ways that he talked to, that meeting of black head coaches to try and like, give them game in some ways? And obviously that was the outcome.
Yeah, man. I mean, obviously, I think it's illustrative of a larger attitude, which is that black people are not doing enough. Doing the job is not enough, or being good at the job is not enough. That, there's some sort of angle to it that we haven't tapped into all the different pipelines, all the different things that white counterparts can do to get those sort of jobs. I mean, people get hired. That's how you get jobs. You get people to believe in you and to hire you for that job. And in as much as anything, that anecdote was illustrative of that. They still think that black candidates are not doing enough to get these opportunities that the white coaches are. And that's just going to be really hard. It's just going to be really hard to convince people that black people deserve those kind of breaks too.